In 1590, an entire English settlement on Roanoke Island vanished, houses intact, belongings left behind, and the single carved clue, CROATOAN. Welcome! Stay with us as we step into fog-shrouded shorelines, torn journals, and the names that haunt the record. You'll hear who came, who stayed, and why historians still debate murder, migration, or something more mysterious. We'll walk the timeline, weigh the strongest evidence, and show what new archaeology and forensic science are uncovering today. By the end, you'll know which theories survive the facts and why Roanoke remains America's first great mystery. If you love real history and cold cases, subscribe and join the search for the truth. Hook and introduction. When English settlers stepped ashore on Roanoke Island, they carried hopes of a new life and the burden of making a dangerous crossing feel permanent. Hello! Families came with tools, food, and fragile plans to build homes on an unfamiliar shore. Among them was a newborn whose birth would later be remembered as a symbol of ambition and loss, and leaders who had already negotiated uneasy alliances with local native communities. The venture was backed by wealthy patrons and driven by a mix of exploration, profit, and a desperate need for footholds in a contested world. The colony did not remain a simple footnote. The governor left to fetch supplies, trusting local friends and a carved promise. Months stretched into silence. When he finally returned, he found empty houses and a palisade without bodies. The single clue he recorded was the word CROATOAN carved into a post, and the letters CRO carved into a tree nearby. No distress mark was found. No mass grave. Only absence, and a message that led to as many questions as answers. Archaeologists, historians, and local storytellers have held this silence up to the light for generations. Some have pointed to close ties between the settlers and the CROATOAN people as the clearest trail, others see evidence of disease, starvation, or hostile intervention. Artifacts unearthed on nearby islands and the Outer Banks have fed the debate. Pieces of English pottery and metalwork that suggest movement, trade, or survival beyond the fort, but none have closed the case. The human detail remains sharp: families who left behind carved notches, everyday tools, and the small, heartbreaking traces of lives interrupted. The mystery matters because it is still possible to picture those last days with painful clarity. Children who had known only the colony's wooden frames, mothers who packed what they could, men who walked into the salt wind looking for help. Every possibility tugs at the imagination and at historical evidence alike. New methods, new digs, and careful study keep the questions alive. If you want more stories that blend archaeology, eyewitness records, and the emotional threads that tie past to present, please subscribe. Founding of the colony. Hello. English investors under Sir Walter Raleigh sent scouts to the Outer Banks and reported back on a place that seemed rich with promise, which set a chain of voyages into motion. Two explorers, Amatus and Barlow, met local leaders and brought two natives, Manteo and Wanchese, to England to learn more. Those reports sold the idea: a foothold in the New World could open trade, weaken Spanish power, and offer new resources. Men who funded the venture wanted profit, prestige, and power. They expected a quick harvest of wealth, or at least a secure outpost for English ships. A larger expedition soon followed, carrying soldiers, artisans, and scholars alongside sailors. Sir Richard Grenville commanded ships while Ralph Lane took charge on the ground as a military governor. John White and Thomas Harriot joined as artists and scientists, documenting plants, people, and the land. The newcomers built fortifications and tried to plant crops. They also relied heavily on local native groups for food and guidance. Corn grown by indigenous people became a lifeline during harsh times. Relations with some native leaders were cooperative at first, but misunderstandings and competition for resources soon caused strain. Pressure from Europe changed everything. A second, more ambitious group sailed with families and a clear plan for a permanent settlement. John White returned to lead this effort, and among the new arrivals was a baby who would become a symbol of the colony's fragile new life. The plan emphasized self-sufficiency, houses, farms, and a structure for governance. Yet the settlement still depended on supply ships and quick communication with England. When those lines failed, months of hope could turn into bitter uncertainty. Hope and human error sat side by side in every decision. Leaders chose sites based on shelter and access to water, but also on perceived safety from Spanish patrols. Tools and timber were scarce. Skilled craftsmen and women tried to adapt European building methods to a very different coast. Alliances with native towns brought both trade and tension, and the colonists' survival often hinged on how well those relationships held. This fragile beginning, bold in aim but fragile in practice, created a story of courage, missteps, and unresolved questions that still tug at the imagination. If you want more clear, dramatic accounts like this, please subscribe and follow along. John White leaves. Hello, John White sailed back to England not as a conqueror, but as a desperate supplier, carrying hopes and promises for the people he had just left. He had been the colonists' appointed leader and an accomplished artist whose watercolors and maps recorded the place and the people. He left behind settlers who depended on him for food, tools, and the next wave of ships. He also left his own family, including his daughter and his granddaughter, whose birth marked a fragile, human milestone for England's attempt to settle a new shore. He intended a short trip. He needed ships, men, and provisions, simple necessities that the struggling settlement could not procure alone. Before departing, he made clear signals and written orders, and set a plan. If the colonists had to leave under threat, they would mark their path with a carved cross. If they moved peacefully, they would carve the name of their destination. This was practical and grim. It showed how small gestures of communication could mean survival. What followed was a cascade of delays beyond any one man's control. Naval priorities, shifting military threats, and severe weather kept supply ships from crossing when they were most needed. White found himself caught in politics and war, trying to secure a vessel while the nation prepared for a larger confrontation on the high seas. He pushed and pleaded. He raised funds. He waited for authorization. Time stretched, and the island he had left grew distant in more than miles. When he finally returned, he found only silence and a single carved clue, a place name left where people had last stood. There was no sign of the cross that would have meant they fled in panic. He searched nearby islands and heard local reports, but storms and the unwillingness of some captains kept him from a full, patient search. The void of those unanswered questions still carries a human weight, a leader's guilt, a parent's fear, and the bitter knowledge that plans can be wrecked by forces larger than any colony. Please subscribe for more stories like this. The Return. Hello, when Governor John White returned to the settlement, he discovered an emptied village and a single carved message that turned hope into a hush. The houses had been taken down rather than burned, tools lay where they had been used, and there were no bodies, no signs of battle, only the word CROATOAN carved into a post and the letters CRO carved on a nearby tree. He had left a system of marks to indicate a planned departure under pressure. A Maltese cross would have been added if the colonists had been forced away, but there was no cross. Silence answered him instead. He searched the island, walking among vacant hearths and cleared palisades, and questioned the few friendly natives who remained nearby. Weather and politics worked against a full investigation. His ship's captain refused to risk a longer voyage to the island named by the carving, citing storms and the dangers of war at sea. So the nearest lead went unexplored. He recorded what he found and then had to leave without the definitive explanation he had come to deliver. The carved name pointed toward a people already tied to the colony by earlier exchanges. The CROATOAN, later known as the Hatteras, had interacted and traded with the settlers, and one CROATOAN named Manteo had visited England and been baptized back in the first contacts. That connection made assimilation a plausible outcome. Some colonists might have chosen to move in with the CROATOAN for survival. It is a clear example of how a single carved word can expand possibilities instead of closing them. Other explanations remained. Some proposed that the colonists attempted to relocate to the mainland and perished along treacherous routes. Others pointed to disease and starvation, or to hostile action from rival European powers or local groups. None of these ideas fit every detail at the site, and none offered the certainty White had sought. The personal losses cut deep, families were scattered, and he never found his granddaughter. The return became less an answer than a lasting ache. It turned the search from a rescue mission into a mystery that generations would debate and investigate. New digs in modern science have added fragments and hints, but the carved CROATOAN still echoes. If you want more cinematic history and careful accounts like this, subscribe for future episodes. CROATOAN Mystery. Hello. When John White returned to Roanoke, he found the settlement empty and a single carved word on a post, a cryptic message left behind as the only clue. The buildings had been dismantled carefully, not burned, and the absence of violent wreckage suggested the inhabitants left under some plan or duress. There was no Maltese cross carved nearby, the mark that had been agreed would mean the colonists fled under attack. Simple, stark evidence that sparked 1,000 stories. The word itself referred to a nearby island and the indigenous people who lived there, a place that English maps of the time identified and sailors knew by name. That connection made the island the first place White wanted to search, but weather and other obstacles prevented him from reaching it. Relationships between colonists and certain native leaders were already established, some indigenous men had traveled to England and returned, and alliances had been formed. Those ties make the theory of relocation to the island plausible and grounded in historical contact, not pure fantasy. Many scholars argue assimilation as the most likely outcome. The colonists may have joined the local community, adopting native ways to survive. Oral histories from coastal tribes passed through generations speak of newcomers who blended into villages, and later English visitors reported finding native groups with European goods and customs. Archaeology supports contact but remains cautious. Finds of metalwork, glass, and European-style ceramics in coastal sites suggest interaction, yet none of these discoveries offers a clean, conclusive trail from Roanoke's palisade to a single new village. Other theories remain in play because the carved message leaves room for doubt. Some researchers point to the possibility of migration inland toward areas where English settlements later appeared, others suggest disease, starvation, or hostile actions by other Europeans or indigenous groups could have scattered survivors. Each idea has evidence and counter-evidence. The hardest truth is that the written record stops, what follows is fragments and interpretation. Archaeologists continue to probe shorelines, riverbanks, and historic village sites using modern tools, remote sensing, careful stratigraphic digs, and material analysis. These methods have tightened timelines for certain artifacts and clarified which items truly date to that first colony period. Scientists also consult native oral traditions and early colonial accounts together, treating both as essential pieces of the puzzle. Progress is gradual, precise, and respectful of the human stories at the heart of the mystery. This unsolved clue, carved with deliberate letters and left to the wind, remains one of the most haunting moments in early American history. It is a human story of families who vanished from view, of a mother and child whose names survived in records but whose fate did not. The CROATOAN mark keeps pulling historians, archaeologists, and storytellers back to the same questions: where did they go, and how did they live on if they did? If you want more deep dives into these old mysteries and the latest investigations, subscribe to follow the work and the wonder. Theories and legacy. Hello, a single carved word, CROATOAN, remains the clearest clue from the vanished settlement, and it shapes every serious theory about what happened. When Governor John White returned to find empty houses and no bodies, that carving on a palisade post was the only message left behind. Many scholars point to that word as the strongest evidence that the colonists moved deliberately toward the CROATOAN people on the nearby island, perhaps to seek shelter, trade, or to join with a friendly tribe. One major line of thought holds that the colonists assimilated with local Algonquian-speaking groups, including the CROATOAN and neighboring tribes. Archaeologists and historians note that survival often meant adapting to local food, shelter, and alliances. Living with natives would explain the lack of European-style graves or ruins. Some later English accounts mention native communities with European goods or oral traditions that could refer to white ancestors, and a handful of artifacts found off-site have been interpreted by some researchers as signs of contact or integration. But these finds are fragmentary and debated, and no direct, incontrovertible link has been established. Another group of explanations focuses on calamity. Delays in resupply, harsh weather, crop failure, and disease could have devastated a small, isolated group far from home. A sudden move under pressure might leave little trace. Other theories include attack by hostile foreign forces or rival colonists, relocation to another English outpost, or even forced removal. Each hypothesis explains some facts while leaving others unresolved, and no single idea fits every piece of evidence. Modern archaeology has tried to bridge the gaps. Fieldwork on Roanoke Island and on Hatteras, the island long associated with CROATOAN, has used careful excavation, ground-penetrating radar, and refined artifact analysis to search for traces of the lost settlers. Some digs have turned up intriguing items that hint at contact, but the results remain ambiguous. DNA and other scientific tools offer new promise, yet ethical concerns and the need for collaboration with descendant native communities shape how research moves forward. The mystery has also left a powerful cultural legacy. The story inspired a long-running outdoor drama by Paul Green, which brought generations of visitors to Roanoke to watch the tale performed near the original site. Fort Raleigh National Historic Site preserves the landscape and hosts educational programs that encourage public engagement. Museums, books, films, and podcasts keep the story alive, turning an archaeological puzzle into a broader conversation about early encounters, survival, and memory. Local identity and national imagination have both been shaped by the disappearance. In coastal communities, the Lost Colony is woven into tourism, school curricula, and commemorations. At the same time, historians and tribal leaders urge careful interpretation, arguing that the mystery should not erase native perspectives or reduce complex human choices to pure legend. Public archaeology projects increasingly invite indigenous voices into planning and storytelling, aiming for a more responsible and inclusive legacy. The unresolved nature of the case ensures it remains a subject of serious study and popular fascination. New methods and respectful collaboration offer real hope that we will learn more, even if a final answer remains elusive. Subscribe for more explorations of history's unsolved moments, and join the conversation about how we remember the past. Thanks for watching. As the sun sets over the empty palisade of Roanoke, the single carved word, CROATOAN, still whispers across 4 centuries. In 1587, a group led by Governor John White, including the first English child born in America, Virginia Dare, vanished and left behind only that chilling clue. Historians and archaeologists have traced drought records, examined artifacts, and proposed many theories, from integration with the Croatoan people to relocation, disease, or violence, but none offers a definitive answer. Imagine standing where they once stood, feeling the salt wind and the same unanswered questions. That human absence is what keeps the mystery alive and why every scrap of evidence matters. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe for more historical mysteries, and leave your theory in the comments. First read them. Next time, we'll dive into the latest digs in DNA research that could finally bring the lost colony into clearer view. The past can be silent, but our search for truth keeps speaking. Stay curious, and first we'll see you in the next episode.